Jordan Peterson now gets into Moses and the parallels between Moses and Jesus. Okay, this is pretty dope.
Example. So in the story of Exodus, the Israelites are lost in the desert. They're lost for like 45 years. And they're always whining and bitching and complaining and, privileged slaves and pining for the tyranny and hoping for the golden calf and complaining that the heavenly food they have to eat isn't good enough because there's not enough variety. And it's like they're really quite contemptible. And near the end of their voyage to the promised land, really on the border, they run out of water again. They go to Moses. They get all about it. And they're faithless and complaining. And God gets sick of them again. And he sends a bunch of poisonous serpents in to bite them. And you might think, well, no good God would do that. It's like, you're not paying attention to the story. What's the story? If you're lost and faithless and then you get whiny and resentful, it's just going to make it worse. And so you're in the desert and you don't have enough to drink and there's all sorts of stupid things you can do that bring the snakes forward. And so that's what happens, is that it's already bad and they make it worse.
So the interesting thing about the story of the Exodus is that it took them years, 40 years, to do a 2-week journey. That is fascinating. And then in this language, you hear Jordan Peterson say, and they're faithless, right? They're faithless. They're arguing. They're bickering amongst themselves. But he points out the faith aspect, right?
The snakes biting them. And they get tired of it eventually. And they go to Moses and they say, well, we know that you can talk to God. And so do you want to see if he'll call off the snakes? And Moses goes and has a chat with God. And God says basically that he's pretty sick and tired of the Israelites and he thinks that some more snakes might be just the thing they need. But he decides that maybe he'll listen to Moses because Moses has, stored up a certain amount of goodwill. And so God says to Moses, cast a serpent in bronze and put it on a bronze pole and put it in the midst of the Israelites so they can all look on it. And if they look at it, then the poison won't affect them. He doesn't get rid of the snakes. He calls upon the Israelites to face what they're avoiding, to face what's poisoning them. And because of that, they become stronger. That's life, man. And so Christ says later, much later, that he has to be lifted up like the snake in the desert. It's a very strange thing for anyone to say. Mm-hmm. And the Israelites have to look on what they're terrified of in order to obtain resilience. That's the healing motif. That snake on the staff is the symbol of Asclepius. It's the symbol that physicians still use now to represent their healing enterprise.
Now that's crazy. I didn't know that's where you guys know what he's talking about, right? The snake motif, right? This thing right here. Jordan Peterson saying this is where this comes from Moses. Like that's pretty fire. And then he breaks it down medically.
They'll use now to represent their healing enterprise. A little of what poisons you makes you stronger. That's the theory, right? And that's the theory of voluntary confrontation. Well, Christ, the crucifix is the same image except expanded. It's like all possible snakes. It's all the things that could happen to you if the worst possible things happen to you all at once. And the Christian calling is to welcome that, right? To become the sort of person who could welcome that.
Here's where I would take it deeper, and maybe this is deeper. This is going to upset you guys even more. Here's how I view it. I think faith, the Christian kind, Christian where you're allowing yourself to be aligned with a God who comes to you and dies, right? Instead of you trying to make your way to God, he comes, suffers, dies. I think that self-imposed adversity to make yourself more conformed into the image of God is the pathway there for many of us. This is what I mean. Too many of us have forgot what it's like to do hard things. We're extremely sheltered. We're extremely comfortable. We're extremely pleasure-seeking perpetually. We hear of passion and we assume emotions and feel good. And we talked about this a few videos ago, how passion is actually about suffering and agony. That's the initial historical definition, the passion of the Christ. So what I think is, outside of it, quote unquote, exposing yourself to things that you're afraid of in a therapy context, what if the practical side is exposing yourself daily to things you don't feel like doing? What if the very things you hate doing are the very pathways that you need to do to become conformed into the type of person you want to be? I'll give you a very practical example. I don't like doing leg day. You're like, oh, this is superficial. You're just vain because you want to be in great shape. No. Listen to me for a second. I don't like doing leg day. Most of us don't love exercising, but you lean in and you use exercise as a metaphor for self-adversity, as a pathway to beat your flesh into submission and build the mental callus and the mental resilience to become the type of person that when you're actually exposed to real suffering and agony, you're prepared, you're equipped. You don't falter, you don't fold, you don't get soft. And I remember this very vividly when my mom fell and broke her shoulder. At the time we were estranged. We hadn't talked. She was an alcoholic. And I remember having to go over there and take care of my mom. We had to literally do everything for her. She lost her Social Security card. Her house was awful, messy. And she needed both of her hips fixed. And I remember going there, and I remember being in arguably the most uncomfortable situation that I could remember in my recent memory. The fumes of how bad her house was from the dog poop. And she was homeless for a minute, and because she was an alcoholic, and then she kind of it was just a mess. And so I remember going over there and imagine having to take care of your mom in ways that you would never imagine having to take care of your mom. And going through that process, I was able to shut my brain down and do the hard things because I had just spent the past 2 years inflicting self-adversity on myself. As something as superficial as most of you guys would think, as strength training. Oh, you just want to be, right? No. Doing the thing you don't want to do for 2 years straight will position you to be okay with doing the thing when life throws you a curveball and now you got to take care of your mom. And so by the grace of God, my mom broke her shoulder right as COVID was starting. Like the hospitals were locked down so bad. She had this gnarly reconstructive surgery on her shoulder, and then they sent her home the same day. They should have kept her there for a week. And that led her to be sober because then she had to come live with me. So then she's downstairs. She can't make it to the bathroom, and I'm just there, right? Like I'm there, and I'm having to just be present and be in the mess. Fast forward, I was with my mom yesterday for Mother's Day. She's going to the gym. She's gotten both of her hips fixed. She's adjusting her eating. She hasn't drank alcohol. She has completely revolutionized. She's taking classes at our local community college. She came to church on Easter Sunday with me. And it's one of those, like, you don't quite know what you're capable of going through until you go through it. But you may not be able to go through it unless you've actually developed the calluses to be resilient, right? And that's, by the way, that's why the suffering changed her. Absolutely, Mimi. But that's why the stuff that you hear, the David Goggins and these guys talking about the ice baths and all these, right? Like all that stuff, that's why that stuff is resonating. Because now we have to, as kids, we would go out inside and play, right? Now you need to carve out time to play. You need to carve out time to do hard things. You need to carve out time to fall, to not to fall literally, but like to stretch yourself. And that's where I think like the disconnect, right? And now you got this Ozempic thing where you could just take a shot and everything will fix instead of learning to actually master yourself, self-mastery, right? What do you think discipleship is?
Job, for example, in the story of Job is tortured by Satan himself. Job's a good man, and God's bragging about him in heaven, about how good he is, and Satan comes along and says, I don't think he's that good. And God says, what do you mean? And Satan says, he's just privileged. Things are going well for him, and so he's good. Let me at him for a while, and we'll see if he's good. And God says, I think he's good. Do your worst. And so Job is, all his enterprises collapse, his servants all die, his wealth is demolished. He ends up extremely ill with a disfiguring disease. He's sitting in the ashes, demolished. His wife tells him that all that's left for him is to shake his fist at God and die. And then his friends come and tell him that it's all his fault. And so that's Job. And what does Job do? Job says, these terrible things have happened to me, but that's not because of some central flaw in me. He maintains his faith in his integral humanity, and he refuses to lose faith in God. And
the interesting thing about Job is that Job happened around the same time as Genesis, which is really interesting. So if you ever look at a chronological Bible, like Job, if you read the Bible chronologically, Job was like somewhere in the middle of Genesis, which is really a trip.
And it's kind of perverse in a way because Job has every bloody reason to shake his fist at God and die, which is what his wife tells him to do. And Job's insistence is no matter what happens to you, you're called upon to maintain faith and move forward. And that's expanded in the crucifixion story.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for checking out the video. Comment down below and let me know what you think. And be sure to check out this video that YouTube is recommending just for you. Let me know if they nailed it. All right? I'll see you over there. Peace.